Hey everyone, James McBride here again. Thanks for joining this practical video on dealing with encryption within your operating system, and is it something that you would like to do? We are going to deal with the how-tos first. How do you get this done? Because maybe you already know the positives and negatives and you just want to get it done. So we're going to look at how to get that done first. You'll see I've got Windows 11 up, and how this first encryption that we're going to look at works is that you encrypt files or folders. So any file, like any of these files on my desktop, I could encrypt, and any folder I could encrypt. So we're going to go to where you would most likely use that, and we're going to use File Explorer to do that. I've got it pinned there, but you may not. You can actually type File in the search, and there's File Explorer, or you can click the Start button and type File, and there it finds it. So we're going to go ahead and open File Explorer, and then we're going to use this left-hand side to go down and navigate our hard drive. So we're going down to C drive, and what we're going to look at is the users folder. This is where all your stuff is. It's put into the users folder. So you can either drop this down and select it, or you can double click it. Either way, it'll show the users on your computer. Now, the users are set up when you first install Windows. So what you should see is whatever you typed in when you were installing Windows is where it gets this name. However, for some of you, you may have inherited this computer. If that happens, the normal way that a user is set up is usually done. In other words, the person that's giving it to you would have went in and created a new user. That's your name, and you would see your folder as well as their folder. However, sometimes people will just say, well, I'm going to give this to so-and-so, so I'm going to go in and change my user ID to, and they change it to you. In that situation, you may only see their name there, and that will be confusing. You'd be like, I see my uncle's name or my dad's name, my mom's name. I see that sitting here, but I don't see me. Well, that's most likely the the folder that you're using. A way to check is you can actually go into it and go into downloads or documents, any of these pictures, somewhere where like if you downloaded something the other day, you can go into downloads, and if you see that file in downloads, then you're like, oh, this is the correct user. That's a very limited experience. That doesn't happen very often, but that's the way to check. You can go into documents and say, oh yeah, that's the document that I created 3 days ago. So that's the way you want to do it. So I'm going to back up here to users, or I could just click here, get the same thing. And then I'm going to right click or secondary click on my folder. Go to properties. And then note right here, there's an advanced button. This type of encryption is an attribute that you set. So we're going to click advanced, and then right here, encrypt contents to secure data. You would just put the check mark on that and hit OK. Once you OK that, you can either click apply and stay on the screen, or if you click OK, that's the same thing as apply. So we'll click OK, and then it gives us a pop-up, and it says, hey, you're changing this attribute called encrypt. What do you want to do with this? See, it's trying to help you out here. Are you just trying to encrypt just that folder and not the subfolders? Or do you want to encrypt that folder and the subfolders and files? Which is what we want. In other words, it's assuming you really want to do all this, but I'll let you choose in case I don't have that right. So that's what I want to do. And you just say, I'm going to apply these changes to this folder and all the subfolders and files. Now, when you do this, there's actually a few system files in there that may not encrypt. So Microsoft keeps a lot of stuff underneath that folder. Notice it says, hey, you need the administrator privileges. And then after that, it doesn't actually have me log in because I'm already logged in as the admin. And here's that error I was talking about. It's like, hey, you can't mess with this because you're actually not supposed to be messing with this. Well, that's okay. You just tell it, ignore all that stuff. In other words, encrypt everything that you can and ignore the ones you can't encrypt, because those are Microsoft system files and they don't want you encrypting them. It's fantastic. That's what we're going to do. They keep trying to talk to me. Anyway, advertisements. Don't you hate that? Advertisements are starting to be built into your operating systems. All right, so that's running and it will finish in about 45 seconds. And in order to reverse this, I would just go in and take that check mark off, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to let it go through and encrypt it. And then I'm going to go back and say, no, I don't want it encrypted, and turn the encryption off. While that's happening, let's take a look at the other type of encryption. Within Windows, there is something known as bit locker. So what you would want to do is just type in bit in your search, or again, type, click on your start menu and then type bit. Either way, it's going to pull up the same thing. If it doesn't pull this up, which sometimes Windows is weird, right? Sometimes it's just like, what are you talking about? Type in BitLocker and it will pull that up. It's one word. If it doesn't do that, so in case it doesn't do that, then just restart your system and try it again. Now, you may have a version that doesn't have BitLocker built into it. You go back far enough and BitLocker wasn't there. So the ones it may not be in its home, or what do they call it? Stream, something like that. So if you don't have BitLocker, then oh, I don't have that version. It's actually in the control panel as it says. So you could go there and check it out. But if it's not popping up here, it likely means you don't have a version with BitLocker on it. So we're going to go ahead and click that, and that'll bring up our profile for whether or not BitLocker is on. See right here, it says to turn it on. And BitLocker is a whole hard disk encryption. It encrypts everything on the hard drive. That's what it does, the whole entire thing. Windows 11, if you have that, Windows 11 allows you to use TPM2O, which is a piece of hardware down on your board someplace that has a bunch of long encryption keys. And then that way, your whole system is encrypted from the get-go all the way into the OS. And we're going to talk about, what's the uses for these. There's actually TPM administration right here. So in order to turn it on, I would need to say, I want to turn this on. And basically at that point, this is just checking. Let's see, let's make sure TPM2O is there. That's what this is doing. And then it comes up and says, okay, look, this is going to have this big long recovery key in case you get locked out. So this gets dangerous, right? This is not a joke. This right here in front of you is basically saying, you need to print this. You need to save this. So if your Windows 10 or 11 is tied to an Outlook account, so you've got your 365 is set up, even if it's just free, save it to your Microsoft account, then save the file, and then print the recovery key. I would recommend all of these because, again, if you lose it, and there's a way to set this up so you can't even boot into Windows, you're screwed unless you have that key. It'll say, what's the key? And you'll have to type it in, and then you'll be able to go from there. I am not going to set mine to go ahead and encrypt this entire hard drive because I don't want to. But basically, once you've done one of these, notice next is I cannot move on until I've done at least one of these. And then it says, okay, I'm encrypting. And you can do other stuff. You can do whatever you're going to do, browse the web or whatever. It'll take it a little longer because encrypting things is very intensive on the CPU, but it's not going to stop you from doing it. If you're afraid of that, then you would do this just before you go to bed, right? You're like, okay, I'm done using my computer. I'm all set. I'm going to print this out. I'm going to do all this stuff. Next, boom, let's start encrypting. I'm going to go to bed. It'll be done tomorrow morning. So you can do that. Again, I don't want to do that on my machine, but it is very easy to do. Now, once it's all set up, it's actually easy to turn off as well. So you go back to that same screen, and where it says turn on, you just click turn off, and it decrypts the drive and does it. They've done a really good job. So if you stop now, your drive won't be protected. And I say, yeah, I don't want it to be. So again, once you've done it, then it'll be turn off BitLocker, and you can go ahead and turn it off if you want. And then actually, you can use BitLocker to go to encrypt your removable media right here. Okay, so let's, this is, I'm sure, done. I'm going to open that back up and show you that it's really easy. You go to advanced and you say, I don't want to encrypt that. And it says, okay. And then it asks again, right? Hey, wait a minute. Do you just want to unencrypt this folder, or do you want to unencrypt that folder and everything below it? And that's what I want to do. So I hit OK and OK it. Oh, can't OK it yet. Just let it go and it will unencrypt it. That's how you do this in Windows. So now we're going to switch over and show you what Mac has to offer. It doesn't offer as much. If you want to encrypt files and folders, just single files and folders, then you have to use some add-on software, and there's plenty out there that are really good. Okay, so I've gotten rid of Windows and now we're on Mac. And what I need to do is go to settings, which I always have down here. If you don't have it down there on a Mac, you can go to the Apple menu and you can go to system settings. That's exactly the same place. In system settings, what you're looking for is Vault. File Vault is its name. This is a whole hard disk encryption, just like BitLocker is, and you would turn it on or off simply with this switch. And you would show the recovery key right here if you want to save that differently. Now, what they've done is they've linked this, they've made the process very fluid and very easy, that this is linked to your iCloud account. So on this machine, I'm on my personal iCloud account. And so this key, that recovery key, that's what I should be circling. This recovery key is actually part of my keychain, meaning it's part of my 1Password. It's part of that. So if I lost access to this machine, I could just simply go into my phone and find that key and type in the key. And it's just as easy as BitLocker. You turn it on and off. You just switch it back and forth. And again, this is the whole system is then encrypted. So now let's talk about why, what would you do? Does this really count for anything? Do you want to bother with it? Well, let's talk about the negative. When you encrypt something, let's take my name. My name is this long, we'll say, on the computer. Once you encrypt that, depending on the bit level of encryption, you are lengthening that out. So again, it's taking the name James, shoving it into a bunch of different characters, and the only way you can figure out which characters to pull out of that is with the key. So the key is going to tell you this is where you find the actual text, which is James. So if it's like 256, sorry, that's off the screen, then it's this long. If it's 64-bit, then it's this long, 128, 256, 512. The bigger the encryption, the more space it's going to take and the longer it's going to take a computer to encrypt it and decrypt it. Every time that if I'm on Windows and I encrypted my entire documents, then every time I click on a document, it's going to have to decrypt it and then show it. For new machines, I would say anything from about 4 years forward, that's really easy for it to do. It can do it very fast. You're not going to see a problem. But does it offer more protection? That's really the key. Does it really offer more protection? Well, it depends on what you're using it for. So if we take just the file and folder encryption that we were doing in the first explanation, what that's really geared to is, let's give you an example where it would work well. Let's say that you've got a notebook computer and you now are living with your roommates at college, and there you are, you're doing your stuff, and your roommate is really hard up, and they're like, man, I gotta do some work, and I have to go down to the library, and they're giving you the sob story. And what they want to do is use your computer. You're not using it. So can I use your computer? Now, that's a very bad thing to do, just FYI, because most people say, yeah, here you go. And then they go, what's your login? And so now you've given them your login. And yeah, you're thinking that's no big deal because I trust them. Yeah, and that's fine. But now, if they go browsing around the web and they pull a Trojan down without knowing it, Trojan now is running under your account. And so anything that happens can happen to your files, your pictures, your videos, all of that. If you're going to do that kind of thing, this is what I always tell students. If you're going to do that kind of thing, then you need to say, okay, well, just a second, let me set you up a user. And I have another video for that. And you go in on your Mac or on Windows and you set up another user, and the default is a standard account or a user account, and you leave it at that. And basically now they can't go over into your pictures. They can't go over into your videos, which is good because you don't want people snooping. But the biggest important thing is if they accidentally get a virus, a worm comes in, then it can't get into your photos and your videos. Now, having said that, there are tricky ways to get around that. And lots of Trojan virus makers know those tricky ways. And then, to oversimplify it, they basically use something within Windows that will allow them to run as Windows or as this other application that does have access to your stuff. And then they do what they want. Encryption then is another level against that. So you would also want to say, I'm going to encrypt my folder. So not only am I setting up a different login for them, I'm going to encrypt this other folder, my folder, so that if somehow they decide to be really snoopy and they are also, bad people and you didn't realize it, they can't get in and read those files. And then, of course, if they get infested at the time they're using your computer, they won't be able to access that encryption. So it's another level of protection. Businesses would use this and do use this quite a bit. Let's say these days, a very modern office, they would have, let's say you're working at a big place, and so you've got 15 people within your department. And what they would do is say you have to be in the office 3 days a week. The other 2 days you can be at home. And basically you just sign up for those days. And then at the office, even though there's 15 of you, there's only 8 computers to use. So when you log into that computer, somebody else has also been using that computer. And so they would have it set to automatically encrypt those folders and files so that if somebody was not being genuine and they actually were trying to hack, then that's another level of defense that's going to protect them and you. So let's talk about BitLocker then, right? BitLocker and FileVault. Let's talk about both of them because they do the same thing. So if this is where it really works, if you tie that down to the hardware and you put in a login down here in the UEFI, then what will happen is just when your computer boots up, it'll basically say you need to put in a password to boot. So you don't even get close to Windows yet. And the whole hard drive or storage device is totally encrypted. There's just everything's encrypted on it. So if they say you left your notebook someplace at a restaurant while you're at a convention and you go back and it's not there and somebody now has stolen that, what's going to happen is they're going to open that computer up and it's going to ask for this password. And there's not a good way for a hacker to get around that. There it is. What am I going to do? Now, if you don't have that, and this is the common way. So if you're talking about FBI and CIA, right, they're going to have all this just encrypted and here it is. And you got one chance to put in a 15-character password and then the whole thing just locks. There's a way to make it very, very difficult to hack. But most people, right, they don't even have that set up down here in the UEFI. What they do is they turn on BitLocker, and then basically it comes in with the Windows login. And as a hacker, you just put in a device, you just plug in this USB device, and then when it gets to that point, it hacks the password. See, the default thought process, I know you may say, well, why would that be? Why wouldn't it be harder to hack the password? That's what you should be thinking. The default way of thinking, and Windows hasn't moved out of that, is that we need a way in order to get into a system that potentially has been locked out by somebody at the business that's disingenuous. So in a big business, they would already have this all thought out. All of it would be thought out, and they'd have the process down and they're ready to go. And it's going to be harder for that hacker to get that notebook, plug in this USB device, and steal the passwords. But at a small business, they may just say, well, this is the notebook, you take it away when you, or maybe everybody's got a notebook and they all travel with their different notebooks. Well, then let's say your head accountant who you never thought would leave, you tick off, and that accountant then says, I'm out of here, I'm gone. So what they do is they go in and change their password to make sure you don't know, and they change it to something really long. BitLocker has been turned on, you don't even have the key for it. And then what ends up happening is in that situation, you can't get in. There's nothing you can do. Oh, wait, there is. You can run that little USB thing, and then it just hacks the password and tells you what the password is. Or even easier, it resets the password. And that's usually where I'd started. Plugging a little USB device into the side of it, boot that up, that USB device up, and then go in and say, reset that password of theirs. And it's done. You're back in. That is why they are not super, super, super protected as the default. And you can get around it. Now on a Mac, right, when you got that file vault, they're telling you right there, here, you can take a look at this, but it's part of your keychain. And so then you deal with a whole different issue here. If you're running a bunch of Macs in your small business, and you allow them to go ahead and set it up and tie it to their iCloud account, then that is in their iCloud account, not yours. And so when they walk out and they've changed that password on a Mac, there's nothing you're going to do to be able to get that back. It's dead in the water. You now have this brick sitting there. And they pushed that basically when we started having all this trouble with the phones, where you buy this really expensive phone and then somebody'd steal it. And because it was easy to hack that password, they could then hack the password and then resell the phone, for $1,200 or whatever it costs. And that's even with Samsung, right? So you buy this really expensive Samsung phone and they would just steal it, and now you're dead in the water. So both Android and iOS and macOS, they went that route. Windows is the default setting for most institutions, 90% in the US or 80% in the US. And so they've got this graduated, like, what do you want to do with this? Well, you have this lower level, which still will let you reset this password and get around it, or you can go more advanced and lock that whole thing up. And if you don't have that key or the login password, you're not getting in. So for most individuals, this is the thing. File and folder is not needed. You're just adding more complication because who's using the machine other than you? And then BitLocker isn't going to do much for you unless you're going to go to the trouble of making sure that whole thing from boot up is totally secure. Otherwise, if I can get my hands on your computer and I can boot up off of another device, which is typical, or I can plug this other device in that doesn't require me to boot up off that device, then I'll just steal your passwords once we get to that screen and you didn't protect anything. Why? Because it's all tied to your login. So even with the idea of you've got your roommate and your roommate's using it, and now you're doing this other thing over here, if your roommate can get your password, then they can see all your encrypted files because the encryption is tied to the password. And it doesn't matter if it's BitLocker or file folder encryption, it's tied to the password. So if we know the password, we're in, we're ready to go. So you have to decide whether or not that's useful to you and what you're really trying to accomplish with it. If you have any further questions, if they're like, how about this scenario or that, or I don't quite get the reasons why you would use it or not use it, let me know. And I can either do an expanded video or I can just, type it out the long way, longhand, and send it to you. Thanks for watching. We'll talk with you later.